Carol, 1941, Dallas, Texas. Not too far back. Let's go back to when you were a little girl. What do you remember about life?
I remember having a little sister when I was 18 months old. I sort of remember stories about it. I remember that my parents were from Germany. We would invite people over to listen to my father's accent. He had, orange, and we would say orange, Daddy, and he would say apple. I remember the neighbors that we had. I remember thinking that I just heard that my parents were from Germany and we were at war with Germany, and I was really confused about that. The neighbors wanted to play war, and I had to be the German.
Yeah.
So that confused me.
What does your dad do for a living?
He was a pediatrician.
Okay. Do you remember any stories about him coming over, your mom coming over?
I know a lot of stories about that.
Okay.
My father was born in 1901, my mother in 1906. They met. My father was in medical school when they met. My mother was studying social work. They got married, and actually my mother's family owned a lumber company. They were wealthy, and therefore my grandfather, which is I'm not proud of, but I understand it, had everybody baptized. So my mother was actually brought up as a Lutheran. The only reason she knew she was Jewish was from her maternal grandmother, who would take her to services, and she did know. My father, on the other hand, his father was a cantor in a small town in Germany, and they were very involved as being Jews in a small town. My mother had to actually convert to marry my dad, even though genetically or whatever she was Jewish, but she had to convert. My dad was in practice, and he was president of B'nai B'rith, and he was arrested because he was Jewish, but they let him out. They weren't organized yet, so they let him out of jail, and that's when he and my mother came to the United States.
When was that?
January of 1938.
1938, so the trouble was already started.
Trouble was started, and he and she tried to get their parents to leave, their families to leave, but they weren't going to leave. They came here because there was an uncle, or actually cousin of my father's, who had come here in the early 1900s, and he was able to get them the papers or the visa or whatever, and so they came directly to New York, to Dallas. They never lived anywhere else.
They lose contact with their family back in Germany?
No, they didn't lose contact with them. My mother was the oldest and had 3 brothers. One of the brothers was a banker, and he was flown out of there were no planes. He went by ship. The German bank, Deutsche Bank, sent him on a ship to South America. And first he went to I'll think of it, Montevideo, and then they ended up in Argentina. And then his brother followed him and came. All this was right before, or right when the war was really going on.
Right.
And the 3rd brother died in Auschwitz. My mother's parents, her mother died of a heart attack after she came here, about the time she was on the boat, or about the time she got here. And my grandfather, her father, then went, he wasn't Jewish supposedly in his mind, but according to Hitler he was. And so he was in 7 concentration camps, as were my paternal grandparents. They were all, I guess because they came from the same area, moved around to the same concentration camps, but they ended up in France, and they were not in an extermination camp. So after the war, they were going to come here. My parents got them a visa, and 3 weeks before the boat sailed, my grandfather, the cantor, died of a heart attack. And I remember when that happened. I remember my father crying. I remember that pretty well. Almost one of my first memories, because I must have been about 3 or 4.
Did your grandmother ever come over then?
She had died of the heart attack. Okay, but then that was my mother's parents. My father's family, he had one brother who did come over here right after Kristallnacht and lived in Dallas and had twins 3 months older than I. So they were the family that we had here, plus the two cousins of my dad's. My grandparents, then his parents, were in those concentration camps, and his brother had come here right after Kristallnacht.
Yeah, yeah. Do you know the name of the camps they were in?
I do not. I know one is Gurs, and one is... They probably would come to me in the middle of the night, and I'll call you.
Your dad, did he ever talk about this at all to you?
A little bit, but not a lot. My grandmother came and lived with us. And so there really wasn't much discussion about it other than I knew that she had been in some trauma. I mean, I was really young, and we started locking our front door, which we never did in Dallas, but she was very frightened that Hitler was going to come back, and so there was a lot of fear.
Yeah, yeah.
She also I remember her very well. I have fond memories. But she prayed every day, and she had her little prayer book. And I remember on the high holidays, I would see her doing the confession, and now Temple Emanu-El has started doing that again. My father was a pediatrician, so he came here and did a residency again. He needed to learn the language. He knew the language. My parents both spoke English, but of course they needed to improve. And he did a new residency and had wonderful, funny experiences there. I mean, he had an Italian friend who just really gave him a hard time. When America went into the war, the first pediatrician in Dallas was Hugh Leslie Moore. And his son, Robert Moore, had to go to the Army. So Hugh Leslie Moore hired my dad to come into his office, which was just a fabulous break. And I cannot tell you how wonderful people were to my parents in this country.
Yeah, it
Wonderful.
must have been a tough time for them.
But it was a very tough time, and they're, not sometimes having contact, sometimes not having contact with their families. But the break that he got was going into this practice.
Right.
And then he went out into private practice on his own, and he later taught at the medical school. He was very well liked and was elected the favorite teacher every year for I don't know how many years.
What was the medical school?
Southwestern Medical School in Dallas.
Now, you mentioned that you had a lot of stories with you and your sister, so tell us a couple of them.
Well, let's start when she was a baby and the stories that I've been told.
And she's how much younger than you?
18 months. I think I was in a big bed and she was in a crib at the time because we shared a room always. We shared a room all the way through high school. But at one point, my mother came in and I was just getting ready to pour. I had filled my shoe with water and I was just getting ready to pour it on the baby when my mother came in and rescued. And I said she was thirsty. She was crying and she was thirsty and I was going to give her some water.
From your shoe.
I may have been wanting to drown her, but I don't know. I was only 18 months old, but I was going to give her some water. I remember that she would wake up at the same time every night, and she would go into my mother and she would go put her hand on her face and say, "Mommy, are you still here?" And then go back to bed. And they did all kinds of things to keep her from waking up until my father woke up. And when he woke up, he got mad and she never did it again. My mother dressed us alike. We were brought up almost like one individual with two bodies, which was not good. I think we were very close, but we probably had resentment, but we were very close and we were always together. And I felt like I was always rescuing her.
Right.
At camp when she was so homesick, when she didn't want to stay at school, on and on and on. And I'm sure most of the memories that I have are not all the wonderful, happy ones, because I'm sure there were some. We belonged to a country club and we would go out there and swim. She borrowed my brand new car and wrecked it. Not bad, just a little. When I got married, my father backed into that car the weekend of the wedding. It's funny now, and it was even kind of funny then when my father hit my car. I mean, it wasn't so funny when my sister, because, it was like, this car's brand new. And
Yeah.
but
You forgave her though, didn't you?
I did. I did now.
Tell me, where'd you go to high school?
I went to Highland Park High School. I went through all the Highland Park schools from Bradfield Elementary, Highland Park Junior High, which is now McCullough, and Highland Park High School. Graduated in '59.
What was high school life like?
High school life was different when I was living it than in retrospect. When I was living it, it was fine. I was very shy, which is hard for people to believe now. I had a very low self-esteem. I just remember just kind of thinking of funny things to say, but I never would say them. I knew people, and I was happy to be there, happy to go to that school. I have since gone to unions, and a couple of things have come to mind. One is that there was more anti-Semitism than I thought there was. I just didn't really look for it or find it. But in the reunions, many people seem to be very warm and really like me, and I'm going, really? But in retrospect, I see more of what was wrong with the school district, and also what I benefited.
What was it that you would do, maybe with your sister, that you would just die if you thought your parents knew you guys were doing it?
I think we were so open. My parents knew everything. I really do. Our family very open, to the point that everything was discussed. I don't really think that we were that rebellious then. Maybe later. But,
You're growing up through a turbulent time after high school. Did that affect you at all, the turbulent 60s?
not so much, because I think I got married in 1964, graduated from college in '63, went to Houston to teach, got engaged.
Where did you go to college?
I went to the University of Texas in Austin and majored in Spanish and German,
Okay.
and had a teaching certificate, and went to Houston out of school to the Spring Branch School District, which was quite a bit like the Highland Park School District.
Is that where you met David?
I met him. He was in medical school here, and I worked at the medical school library in the summer between my, I think, maybe sophomore and junior year, and we started dating then. He was also not Jewish. His name is Alkek. He is of Lebanese descent. He did convert to be Jewish, but I don't know whether he's still Jewish. I think he sort of considers himself Jewish. I don't know.
And where did you guys settle down when you got married?
We got married, and the first year we were married, we lived in Irving, because I taught in Irving, and you had to live in Irving to teach there. It was also very close to the medical school. So we lived there for 2 years. He did his residency at Baylor Hospital, and then we moved to Philadelphia. We lived in Philadelphia for 3 years.
And the reason you guys moved to Philadelphia?
That's where he did his dermatology residency at Temple Skin and Cancer Hospital. And he didn't want anyone there to know that he was not Jewish from birth. He hadn't converted yet. But we were charter members of Temple Shalom. And at Temple Shalom, it was really a wonderful experience, because we had these meetings. We didn't have a rabbi. We were deciding, do we want bar mitzvahs? Do we not? He was very active, and so he actually, when we did have services, was on the bima, and our friends gave a bar mitzvah party for him after he was up there, and everybody gave him fountain pens. I remember that. But in Philadelphia, he did not want people to know that he wasn't Jewish, and he was the one who knew the blessings and knew the prayers, and the other people didn't.
How was winter for you in Philadelphia?
I loved the winter in Philadelphia, but that was because I was from Dallas, and the little children in the neighborhood, we lived in a kind of a nice apartment area with a lot of young families, and they would come to my door and see if I could come out and play, because I loved the snow, and we would do all kinds of things. My firstborn was born in Philadelphia in '67, and people would bundle up the babies, put them outside in their buggies, and go inside because the babies needed fresh air. Cover them. We made some kind of a sled that we would take him across the street to the grocery store, all kinds of things. I loved the winter there.
So there was no fear back in those days of trouble with a baby outside by itself.
Oh, no. As a matter of fact, when we were growing up, we were always outside here and playing outside and walking to school, and there was just never anything.
What brought you back to Dallas?
We wanted to come back, I think, mostly because we had family here. His family was in Victoria, Texas. He had been doing some locum tenens, taking the part of doctors in Dallas in the summer. And so we came back here. He was stationed at Carswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth. And we bought a house on the west side of Dallas in all the Fox and Jacobs accent houses. And he commuted over to Fort Worth because he didn't have any red lights like he did in Philadelphia. It was an easier commute than it had been in Philadelphia.
And your second child
was born here, Presbyterian. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that marriage ended in a divorce.
Right.
And pick up from there for you. Did you go to work then?
Yes, I had to go to work, and I didn't know what I would be doing, but I was able to get a job with Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Texas in the training department.
And when was this?
1980 is when I went to work.
Okay.
And there was a friend here from Dallas, Ed Balaban, who worked there and who got me the interview. And I went in and I was hired. Now, not at that time yet to be in the training department, but I had the first level of claims processors who came out of training. And then after that, I was promoted as supervisor of the training.
Yeah.
I had been advised not to teach kids, even though I'd been teaching. I taught school in Irving, in Houston, and then in Irving. And then substitute taught while I was in Philadelphia. And people said when after I came back and was divorced, you don't do service to your own children when you're with children all day long. So I turned it into corporate training and really stayed there 28 years.
Wow. What was the happiest time in your life?
The last 5 years, where I've had a wonderful significant other in my life. And it's the most recent, so that's what I think of. I've pretty much had a good attitude all along. And
was there an invention in your lifetime that came along that you went, wow, how did we ever get along without that?
the television comes to mind, but I don't watch television. The whole thing with cell phones and computers and technology that I really don't understand, but I take advantage of every year.
A car that everybody in the family wrecked but you. What was that?
A Dodge Dart, light blue Dodge Dart I bought myself.
You remember what you paid for that?
Maybe $8,000. Would that be possible? Maybe less. Probably less. I know my parents bought a house in University Park, and they bought it for $12,000. So the car was probably a lot less than that, but I don't remember.
Now, in your lifetime, you've lived through so many momentous occasions.
Oh.
Of course, President Kennedy assassination, something good, the moon landing for the first time in '69, the tragedy of 9/11. Was there something that stood out in your lifetime that you went, wow, I know exactly where I was the day it happened, that really affected you?
Well, I certainly know where I was the day Kennedy was assassinated, because I was teaching school in a very Republican neighborhood in Houston, and the news came across about 1 o'clock that he had actually died. And one of the girls who was in junior high, I was teaching 7th and 8th grade, was just cheering. She was just really happy because she had heard nothing but bad things about Kennedy. And I remember taking her by her shoulders and looking at her and saying, don't ever be happy that the president of our country was killed. And I bet she hadn't forgotten me. There was also one student that I had who was just fabulous. She was in the 8th grade. She was outstanding. She was a Jewish girl named Pat Kalmans, and I had a lot of warmth for her. I always wondered what happened to her. And there's been a lot of things that have happened in my life that I would say they were beshert. But I was at a funeral about 3 years ago, a graveside in San Antonio, and the person next to me turned around to introduce herself, and she said, "Hello, I'm Pat Kalmans." And I go, "Pat Kalmans?" When I told her, I was Carol Brooks Saylor at the time. We just had this wonderful reunion, and she had all these wonderful memories of me and had told her husband about me. So that was really, and there have been several things like that. I've had wonderful experiences where I was able to meet Konrad Adenauer, when we were in Germany, and got his autograph. There was a concert that Van Cliburn did. I'm very much into classical music, and he was going to do a concert right after he won the Tchaikovsky, and I couldn't get tickets. They were sold out immediately. The concert was at the high school. So that day, what we used to do for fun was to go downtown on the bus, girls, and we would have lunch, and we would go to a movie, and then come back. Well, that particular day, one of the girls wanted to buy some sheet music for her playing the piano. So we went to Whittle's Music Company. We'd done that before, and we heard this beautiful playing. So we kind of wandered back. They had a lot of rooms, and they had pianos in them. And there was Van Cliburn and his mother practicing for his concert.
Wow.
It was like a living room, and they motioned that we could come in. We sat down and we listened to his concert in a private room, and we were able to get his autograph.
Are you involved at all with the Jewish community?
I'm very involved with the Jewish community, probably not as much as I used to be. I grew up at Temple Emanu-El. I went all the way through Sunday school and was confirmed there. We didn't do bar and bat mitzvahs yet, because I was confirmed in 1956. I was at the old temple on South Boulevard. Then we had Sunday school at SMU for a while. And then I was at the dedication of the temple that exists now. I sang in the choir. I sang in the junior choir, and then moved into the senior choir when I was 14. And sang in that choir off and on, because I went away. I went to college. I lived in Philadelphia. But, most of the time when I would be in town, for 52 years. And that was very important because the music was important to me. After I joined the choir, my mother and my sister joined, and my father, who was very musical, played the piano beautifully. If he couldn't have passed the state boards in Texas for pediatrics, he was going to go to Hollywood to play the piano for movies. That was what he wanted to do. Really played well. He was the page turner for the organist at Temple Emanu-El, so it was a real family affair.
You have the 2 children, and you have 2 grandkids.
Yes.
What advice does Grandma have for the next generation?
What I wish for my grandchildren is that they would be more well-rounded. They're very into sports, but there's so much out there. There's so much that I would want them to avail themselves of as much as they possibly can. I certainly want them to be good Jews. I think if there is such a thing as a sin, it would be giving up being Jewish after everything that my family went through. I feel very strongly about Judaism. I have been active in the Jewish community in that before I had to go to work, I was vice president of National Council of Jewish Women. I was on the board of the American Jewish Committee. I was very involved in the thrift shop that the council had. Youth group was very important to me. That was a real benefit. When I went to work, I continued to do some things for council, be on the PACE committee, etc. But I have not been as active. I do volunteer for Temple Emanu-El in what's called Caring Congregation, and I love that, going to the hospital and visiting people who are hospitalized that are members of Temple. And I'm in a book club where everyone's Jewish, and many of the people just want to read Holocaust books. Not really, but a lot of them. play mahjong. That's Jewish.
Well, thanks for doing this today.
Well, thank
You
you.
did a great job.
Did I?
Yeah, you did.
Well, you're a good questioner. You are, and I thank you.